Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. We start from Mali, where 53 soldiers have been killed and 10 wounded in a terrorist attack on a military post in the country's northwest. In a tweet, Mali's communication minister Yahya Sangare said a civilian was also killed at the outpost in Indelemane. The assault is one of the deadliest strikes against Mali's military in recent months. Mali's communication minister Yahya Sangare said the process of identifying the bodies has started. The deadly assault has sparked protests outside a military camp in the country's capital, Bamako. Northern Mali came under the control of Al-Qaeda-linked militants after its army failed to quash a rebellion in 2012. 9 children have been killed in a mine explosion in Afghanistan's northeastern province of Takhar. Police say the Taliban-planted mine exploded when children were going to their school. It said the mine was planted on a road in Tahiri village. The police said the children aged 9 to 12 are among the killed. No group, including Taliban, has not taken the responsibility for the blast. A fact-finding team has found Indian brutalities have led to increased psychiatric problems in the people of occupied Kashmir. In its report titled Imprisoned Resistance, the 11-member team states the Kashmiri people are living in constant mental stress and fear. It adds that it will take Kashmiris decades to recover from the trauma caused by Indian atrocities. The report said Indian forces raid villages and localities in the valley almost every night. There is also constant surveillance and policing of the valley's media centers. Thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of occupied Ladakh's Kargil district against India. The demonstrations broke out against the bifurcation of occupied Jammu and Kashmir into 2 union territories. The protesters chanted anti-India slogans stating they are against the bifurcation. Markets are also shut and public transport has been off the roads for the last 3 days. Meanwhile, thousands of Kashmiris held protest against Indian occupation across the valley after Friday prayers yesterday. Indian forces also disallowed a 400-year-old religious tradition at Khanqah-e Naqshbandiya in the valley yesterday. The occupying forces stopped Kashmiris from offering prayers at a shrine and shot tear gas at them. The 35th annual summit of Association of Southeast Asian Nations has opened in Thailand. The meeting is being attended by ASEAN states and leaders from 6 non-members, including China, Australia, Japan, and Russia. International trade, the South China Sea dispute, and the Rohingya crisis are some of the topics up for discussion. More in this report.
Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha opened the summit with a speech highlighting sustainability in the private sector. Chan-o-cha pledged to increase cooperation in sectors such as energy and food resources.
On sustainability, the Thai government has increased the opportunities for private sectors to give advice on the matter, as sustainability involves many parties, and we also need intensive cooperation from them in areas such as human resources, energy and food resources in order to cater to the people's demands and bring the country forward into prosperity.
Speaking at the ASEAN Business and Investment Summit, Malaysia's Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad criticized US President Donald Trump's trade war. Mahathir said the current surge in protectionism highlighted by the US-China trade war will not last long and free trade will triumph at the end.
If you cut down on its imports of palm oil from Malaysia, we will cut down on some of our imports from you. Equal amount. You do exactly what Mr. Trump does. Not a very nice man, but he does those things, and we can learn even from people who are not so nice.
The leader will also hold the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Summit on Monday. The Indian and international media have reported New Delhi is now the only obstacle to forming the world's largest free trade zone. The RCEP covers a third of the global economy and has already missed numerous deadlines to end negotiations, which kicked off in 2012.
US President Donald Trump says talks on a trade agreement with China are going well. Details in this report.
The president's remarks follow comments by U.S. and Chinese officials describing progress on an initial deal.
Well, we're moving along with the deal with China. China wants to make the deal very much, and we have a good relationship, and we'll see what happens. I don't like to talk about deals until they happen, but we're making a lot of progress.
Earlier, trade negotiators from China and the U.S. spoke over the phone. The conversation was held at the request of U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. China's Commerce Ministry said that the two sides reached consensus on principles concerning the 17-month-old trade war. It said the two sides have made progress and are in the process of resolving outstanding issues.
U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry has refused to testify in the ongoing impeachment inquiry against U.S. President Donald Trump. President Trump says the majority of American voters will support him against the impeachment. The energy chief is the latest member of Trump's administration to refuse to cooperate with the House of Representatives in inquiry. Perry said in a statement he would consider an invitation to a public hearing. The secretary had earlier refused to provide subpoena documents, arguing the impeachment inquiry was not properly authorized. Yesterday, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi suggested the public hearings would begin in November. One Palestinian has been killed after Israeli airstrikes hit the Gaza Strip. Gaza's health ministry said the young person died from shrapnel injuries. Earlier, Israeli troops shot the injured 88 Palestinians during weekly protests along the border. They were protesting against Israel's blockade of the Gaza Strip. In Iraq, thousands of anti-government protesters have blocked all the roads leading to the main Gulf port of Qasr. Port authorities say all operations have been at a complete standstill since protesters first blocked its entrance on Wednesday. This comes after security forces used live rounds and tear gas on them overnight. The protesters are demanding an end to corruption and unemployment. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the Iraqi government should listen to the protesters and ease restrictions on the media. Pompeo also said all sides should reject violence. Over 200 people have died since anti-government protests began last month. Clashes have erupted for the 22nd consecutive weekend between Hong Kong police and protesters. Police fired tear gas at thousands of protesters, attacking subway stations and shops in flash mob rallies across the city. Protesters wore face masks in defiance of emergency laws that have a penalty of up to a year in prison. The demonstrators threw petrol bombs at a police station's gate and inside the compound. Protesters have criticized Hong Kong's leader, Carrie Lam, for failing to protect their freedoms. Hong Kong has been battered by months of massive protests ignited by a controversial extradition bill. In Chile, what started as a general protest against rise in subway costs has turned into a united expression of animosity against the system. Now the demonstrations have lingered on, bringing the country to halt and uncertainty. Details in this report.
Weeks of violent clashes between anti-government protesters and police shook the South American nation of Chile to its foundations. The unrest has resulted in 20 deaths, hundreds of injuries, over 7,000 arrests, and cancellation of 2 important summits. Many Chileans think that the anger had been brewing up for years.
I think that this has been coming up from behind now for years, and I think it finally blew up. These protesters aren't just from now, this has been brewing for years. The people are tired. We are tired.
Chile's President Sebastián Piñera has scrapped the fare increase along with shuffling 1/3 of his cabinet. He declared a state of emergency in 6 cities, including the capital, Santiago. Despite government's efforts, protesters have rejected government's crisis management measures.
I find that society needs a change. This government needs a change. I admit that my position was initially to support Piñera, but I feel that this is not going anywhere. The government has done absolutely nothing.
Amidst continuing friction, Chile's President Sebastián Piñera announced that COP25 summit will be held in Spain instead of Chile's capital, Santiago. The unrest has also affected the country's tourism industry, as tourists are reluctant to visit in current conditions.
Up until the 30th of September, we had already registered 3.5 million tourists. Tourism is a very sensitive industry, and we have seen reservation drop by around 50% these last 2 weeks.
UN investigators arrived earlier this week to probe the rights abuse allegations. The government have welcomed their presence, saying they have nothing to hide. But the Chileans say they will continue to take the streets until the very end.
All the 39 people found dead in a refrigerated lorry in Essex have been identified as Vietnamese nationals. Police say they have contacted the Vietnamese government and victims' families for the further investigation. Vietnam has strongly condemned human trafficking after the tragedy. Meanwhile, a man from Northern Ireland has been charged with the manslaughter of the 39 people found in the lorry container. 23-year-old Eamon Harrison also faces human trafficking and unlawful immigration charges. Harrison was arrested at the port of Dublin last week after taking a ferry from France. He is the second person charged in relation to the tragedy. He faces an extradition hearing this month. In the U.S., a new wildfire has rapidly engulfed 8,000 acres overnight in the Ventura County, north of Los Angeles. Rescue officials say 7,500 people have been evacuated from the area. 400 firefighters are battling the inferno with helicopters. Local officials say strong winds are causing the fire to spread and threatening 1,800 homes. 80,000 people remain without power after intentional blackouts. Welcome back. The International Day to End Impunity Against Journalists is being marked around the world. A report by the United Nations says killings of the journalists rose by 18% between 2014 and 18 compared to the previous 5 years. The report says with an average of 2 murders a week, close to 500 journalists have been killed in the last 5 years. It says journalists were targeted most in Arab states with 149 killings. Latin America and the Caribbean follow with 127 murders. The report says 90% of those found responsible for the deaths of 1,100 journalists between 2006 and 2018 have not been convicted. In Burkina Faso, the city of Bobo Dioulasso, once a tourist hub, is being avoided by travelers because of the country's security problems. The city's hotels are now mostly empty, its heritage sites are quiet, and the souvenir shops struggling to stay open. Local vendors worry about their dying businesses. Details in this report.
The city of Bobo Dioulasso was once a hotspot for tourism in Burkina Faso, known for its mosque, animated street life, and iconic train station. Located in the west of the country, the city was a top destination for culture and architecture, and also benefited from its location on the route from Mali to the Ivory Coast. But recently, concerns over security have led to a sharp drop in the number of visitors.
Before, during the holiday periods, you would see hundreds of tourists here every day, but now we go 1 week or 2 weeks before seeing a tourist.
Jihadist attacks in the north and east of the country have caused over 600 deaths since 2015. Though Bobo Dioulasso itself has not been targeted, the western region has seen several attacks, and an Italian-Canadian couple who disappeared in December of last year while travelling are still unaccounted for. Many Western embassies now advise against visiting large parts of the country, including Bobo Dioulasso. And those who rely on tourism for generating income are forced to find new ways to make money.
All I do is make my fabrics. I don't really have other work, but as there are no tourists, I have no choice but to help out with masonry work to earn cash for food and medicine for me and my kids.
Many in the hospitality industry have also been struggling, like this hotel owner.
We have lost everything, to be honest. The number one priority is the staff's salaries, then the taxes. We can't even afford the taxes.
And so today, Bobo Dioulasso is a city in limbo, with inhabitants tentatively trying new business ventures as they anxiously await peace and a return to business as usual.
In France, the street theatre company La Machine has unveiled a monumental mechanical sea dragon in Calais during a 3-day urban show. Ordered by the city's town hall, the dragon will remain to become a new tourist attraction. More in this report.
A 10-meter high, 25-meter long monster built of steel and carved wood had met its fan in the streets of Calais.
It's good because the dragon is tall and it spits fire, there's smoke, and sometimes there's even water falling, so it's good, it's cool.
The inaugural show featured actors, musicians, and lights in a sensational show of the fantasy creature. Hundreds of people thronged the streets to get a glimpse.
It is the most impressive machine we have seen since the beginning. I'm all over it because I'm from here, and it is true that it's much more impressive than the others.
From December 17th onwards, the public will be able to enjoy rides in the carriage on the back of the dragon through the city. The company founder Francois Delarosière has said the people of Calais have taken to the dragon.
The people of Calais and the inhabitants of the region came in large numbers. Calais is suitable to accommodate large crowds, and everyone can easily see and enjoy it.
The spectacle culminates tomorrow with a breathtaking display and performance on the seafront.
The World Trade Organization has authorized China to slap tariffs on the U.S. imports worth over $3.5 billion. In a years-long dispute over U.S. anti-dumping practices, China had asked the WTO for permission to hit the U.S. with more than U.S. $7 billion in tariffs. Washington voiced disappointment with the decision, arguing the ruling has no foundation in economic analysis. A U.S. trade official stressed the WTO decision will not have any impact on continuing trade discussions between the U.S. and China. The trade official added the U.S. government will discuss with interested parties on how to move forward. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you may follow us on social media at Indus Special.